So overall, my review of this book is fantastic. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was interesting to read. It was easy to read. It was full of great information. It inspired me to start thinking about changes, not that I can make personally, but like, wouldn't it be neat if this was the solution? It inspired me to encourage others to say, hey, look, where are you in the organization? What can you do to kind of address some of these changes? What are your solutions? I want to hear your ideas as well. Welcome to another episode of Christian Combatives. I'm your host and servant in Jesus Christ, Paladin Actual. Today I'm going to be doing a book review of a book that was sent to me by Pastor Joe Beran. The book is The Ends of the LCMS, Reacting to the Diagnosis of a Post-Christian America and Recovering. You can search for that on Amazon if you'd like to, or you can just search for his name, Joseph Beran. You'll find it. It's pretty easy to find. In any case, he reached out to me and he said, hey, would you like to, check out the manuscript for this book and read it and stuff? And unfortunately, it took me longer than I would like to get back to him, but it was absolutely worth the read when I was able to do it. So, what is this book even about? Who is it for? That kind of thing. Let's get into that. So, first of all, actually, the easiest question to answer is who is this for? The book is not particularly long. It's like 160 pages or something like that. It's not that long. I sat down, I read it all in one sitting. And it held my attention the entire way. It wasn't written at this like really high theological level where you have to be a pastor, you have to have a doctorate or whatever to understand what's going on. But it wasn't written at a level that was like dumbed down. And as a pastor, you're not going to get anything out of it. So whether you're a layperson or a pastor, this book is fairly easy for you to read. The book is probably, it's less for like, let's say you're 16 or whatever necessarily. It's probably less for that kind of person and more for the person who's in their 18 through 20s or whatever, because a lot of the book talks about kind of solutions and stuff, how you can help to make sure the church is being taken care of, how you can possibly even look into going into the ministry, things like that. So while it could possibly be a use for the older teenagers, it's probably more written for the I don't know, the 18 through 90-year-old. All right. That's probably the demographic that's going to get the most out of this book. So what is this book about? It's interesting right off the bat. He grabs me with this definition of, he talks about the ends of the LCMS, the ends of the LCMS. So you've already got in your mind like an idea of what this is about, right? You're like, oh, it's it's the end of the world type thing. But there's actually kind of two meanings of the word the end that he refers to, the ends of the LCMS. The first of the ends of the LCMS, yes, end of the world, like we have to look out because, civilizations have risen and fallen. He talks about different churches, the church in Ephesus, the church in Corinth, whatever, the church in Rome. The different churches have existed throughout history, and as strong and as faithful as these churches have been, there is the reality that a lot of times parishes close. Even parishes that are well established close down. So church organizational structures, it is possible for them to close down, to change. The LCMS wasn't always the LCMS. It was, you've got these different synods before then. You've got the entire ancient Christian church, and it develops, over time. It changes names, it changes kind of organizational structures, things like that. So we shouldn't think that the LCMS is somehow immune to this, that the LCMS, as opposed to every other Christian church throughout history, is immune to any sort of change, and we can just, do whatever we want and keep driving until we go off some inevitable cliff. So one of the main focuses of this book is to kind of look at the predicament we are in as a church body, as an LCMS, and as a kind of Christian body within America and within the entire world. So we look at this and we say, okay, what are the challenges that we're facing? What are the problems that we currently have? What are the problems we could probably have in the future? How do we address these problems now? What are the different solutions? That sort of thing. So one of the things he talks about, again, the ends of the LCMS, you think of like the end of the world type thing. Okay. That's one meaning of the word. But the other thing that he talks about is he talks about the ends of the LCMS in the sense of like a telos. If you don't know what a telos is, then you probably didn't take Greek. But if you know what a telos is, like the end of man, the purpose of something, like the purpose of water is to hydrate me and refresh me. Delicious. It's not the end of the world type thing, but it is the end goal, the end. What is it there for? What is the purpose? So the purpose of Christ coming to earth was to redeem mankind. That was the telos of Christ. That's why when he was on the cross, he said, tetelestai, it is finished. The telos has been completed. It is finished. Humanity is redeemed. So the ends of the LCMS, what is the function of the LCMS? What is the purpose of the LCMS? Why do we have an organizational structure at all? Why aren't we just, freewheeling Christians or whatever? So he gets into that as well. I'm going to look at his table of contents here. I don't want to spoil too much of his book. It actually is a really fascinating read. I go through a lot of books. Usually if I can get them on audio, that helps. and there are some books that are frankly a slog to get through, and there's some books that are that are fascinating to get through, but don't really have a lot of depth. And thankfully, this one manages to walk that line where it's interesting enough to keep you engaged. Again, I was able to easily sit down and read it in one sitting, but at the same time, it gave me information that was useful throughout the entire book. So the table of contents. Let me see what we've got here. So he's got a couple of different parts. The first part is the diagnosis. So he looks at the things that are going on in the LCMS. So do we have any problems that we need to look at? Do we have any symptoms that we need to engage with? He talks about the decline of churches, the decline of pastors. There's not enough pastors to go around. There's so many unchurched people. How do we reach these people? Mission societies, things like that. He talks about all of these problems. Now, if it was just that, okay, fine. Anybody can just sit back and nitpick and complain. There are some people who may say, well, the LCMS is fine, but really anybody who thinks about it, for an extended period of time is going to say, hey, look, we're living in a society that rejects Christianity kind of on a regular basis. Christianity is mocked on a regular basis. How do we continue to function as a society? Honestly, how do we keep the lights on? That sort of thing. Like, how do we shepherd souls into heaven, but also how do we continue to function as an organization that needs funds, that needs buildings, that needs pastors, that needs volunteers, that needs DCEs, that needs all of these other different things? How do we continue to function? So it looks into the problem of this. So part one, diagnosis. Here are some of the things that he has in the table of contents. When symptoms appear in the church, the effects on the LCMS, institutional decay, and the end result. So he kind of goes through the whole spectrum of like, look, here are some problems. Here are the things that the problems cause. Here's what they will inevitably lead to. Kind of look out if these things are not addressed. They can lead. If you have gangrene in your arm and you leave it like unaddressed, your arm may eventually fall off. But you may be able to treat it when it's a small enough problem that it can fix it and you can be healthy again. So this is one of these things where, look, we need to be self-aware of the issues that are happening. So for example, we don't have enough pastors. How do we get more pastors? This is the question. Now, part two is called prescription. So part two in his book is the prescription. Here are the table of contents again, section headings. Towards a common end, rethinking mission, options and trade-off. What can I do? Conclusion and end notes. So in this, he doesn't just kind of nitpick and say, hey, we as the LCMS, we need more church, we need more pastors, we need more money, we need more whatever. He doesn't just talk about like we need. But he talks about possible solutions and different ways that these things have been handled in the past. So for example, he gets into kind of the institutional structure of the LCMS and how we go about educating pastors. This actually got my monkey brain thinking a little bit. This isn't specifically something that he was writing about in the book, but me just reading this book kind of got those juices flowing. So my expectation is if somebody else reads this book and they're thinking about what if I can come up with a solution to kind of help the LCMS in some sort of way. Look, if I'm dumb enough and I can start thinking of a solution, I'm sure that some smart people who actually read this book will be like, oh, okay, so this is the specific problem kind of laid out on a paper. I might have some solutions to this. I might have some options that maybe other people haven't considered. So for example, I was reading in the book, it felt like a conversation. I was reading in the book about seminary. All right. So to get to seminary, you require to move. It costs money. It takes a lot of time. It's really difficult. There's a 4-year commitment in seminary, 3 years in some cases. It's a lot of commitment. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of resources. It's a lot of. There's only 2 locations you can go to seminary. Fort Wayne and St. Louis, and this can be a challenge for a lot of people to get into the ministry. And this isn't necessarily, they didn't have Fort Wayne Seminary back in the apostles' time, but rather they were teaching people at the local congregation. They were raised up in the local congregation. And he suggested it might be possible to go back to this. Now, of course, he also talks about the downsides of some of these ideas. So raising up somebody in the local congregation means, hey, you find somebody in your congregation, you might be a good pastor. Let me continue to train you over the course of a few years. The problem, one of the downsides with this is as a result of training this individual person at this individual, by an individual pastor and individual parish, you have different people being trained at different parishes and possibly different, I don't want to say different things, but there's less consistency in the curriculum. There's less consistency in the training and the grading and stuff like that. And to a degree, that's a bad thing, but to another degree, that might also be a good thing. There might be some people who have really fantastic mentors and pastors who teach them and raise them up, and they become these fantastic, Timothy or Titus or whatever. And you get some other people who are trained and they're sufficient to fulfill the task, and that's also fantastic. But maybe they're not writing, I don't know. They're not doing as good. They're not mentioned as frequently as Paul mentions Timothy and Titus. So there's a potential downside to this model. So anyways, I'm listening to this sort of thing and I'm thinking about, okay, well, what were the steps that I had to go through to go to seminary? Well, for one thing, I had to have a bachelor's degree before I went to seminary. Now, those of you who are familiar with me know that I got a bachelor's degree in psychology through an online college, American Military University. Those of you who have also been paying attention will know that this degree is completely useless. I learned absolutely nothing that would have contributed to my seminary education whatsoever. I'm not smarter for having gotten a bachelor's in psychology from an online university. And then before that, I had an associate's in general studies or whatever. I learned how to do like algebra 2 and stuff like that. Again, not funk. The only thing that maybe it taught me was like how to write papers, but it didn't even teach me how to write papers in Chicago Turabian. I used like APA or MLA or whatever. So researching and writing papers, maybe a little bit. Like I was used to being a student by having a bachelor's degree, but other than that, it contributed nothing to my seminary education. So after reading this book, I was thinking to myself, I was like, okay, what would have happened if I instead of having to slog through a bachelor's degree to get to seminary, which gives you the equivalent of a master's degree, what if seminary was just based on teaching people, preparing people for the office of the holy ministry, rather than preparing people for an academic degree, for example? Now, I get that there might be places where an academic degree is useful. You might want to have a PhD or whatever, then you can go and you can teach places, or you need accreditation for some sort of reason. But in terms of actually being a pastor, a requirement to have a bachelor's degree before you can go to seminary, I don't really understand fully the rationale behind it. And there's also some sort of requirements of you have to have had this bachelor's degree within, I don't know, 10 years or something before you apply to seminary. And so so for me, I'm thinking about, I'm like, okay, I see some of the problems. Some of the problems that he talks about in the book. Okay, there are not enough pastors. There's not enough, you have to have a lot of money to go to seminary. Even if seminary itself is paid for, you need to pay for that bachelor's degree in advance. You need to complete all of this academic work before you even begin the 4 years of academic work, and you have to move and all of these other obligations. So he points out a bunch of these problems and he starts suggesting a couple of different solutions. And he talks about the upsides and downsides of the solutions. Now, one of the things that I want to say, okay, like in advance, I'm a bit cynical. And the moment I started hearing about, okay, well, what are these solutions so we can get more people in the parish, so we can grow the parish, immediately my brain clicked over to, oh no, here we go. We're going to start talking about like this church growth nonsense. We're going to start talking about sacrificing doctrine. We're going to start talking about appealing to a more broad general audience. We're going to be less Lutheran and more accepting of non-denominational and Mormons and whatever. Didn't go there. Thankfully, it didn't go there. And in fact, it specifically didn't go there. It acknowledged that there are some attempts that have happened in the past where people are like, okay, well, how do we address this shortage in church workers? How do we address the shortfall in the amount of people who are attending church? How do we reach the unchurched better? And in the past, there have been, let's say, solutions that are willing to sacrifice doctrine, that are willing to sacrifice truth, that are willing to sacrifice Lutheran distinctives. Now, specifically, he mentions these things as a counterpoint to say, look, this is what was tried in the past. It did not work. In addition to it not working, it was not the right approach to do. You cannot sacrifice doctrine. You cannot sacrifice truth for the sake of being more approachable. If you're in church on Sunday, my sermon was kind of about that. But this was one of the things. Okay, so this was one of the concerns that I had before kind of getting into the further meat of the book, is that the solutions were going to be basically, okay, well, basically we churn out subpar pastors. We have less educated, less qualified pastors, and that's how we solve the pastor shortage. Or we have churches that teach less strong doctrine, therefore more people can show up. But that wasn't what the solution was. In fact, I'm not going to get into the solution specifically because that's what the book is for. But it gets into a couple of solutions. And again, the section options and trade-offs is he acknowledges. He doesn't say, look, here are the solutions. Follow these things. Follow this Benedict option. Follow this whatever. And you're going to have a perfect church. And you're going to have all of your problems solved. But rather, on the other hand, he says, look, here are some potential options and the trade-offs for each option. This is why this would work to help solve this problem. But the downside to this approach might be this thing. It was honest. It was honest, and this is appreciated. So at the end of reading this entire book, my biggest kind of negative, it isn't about the book itself. It's about the impact of the book. This is wonderful material. This is excellent material. I highly, highly recommend it. I highly encourage people to read it. But the problem is, everything that would be affected would take time to be put into effect. Like, it's great to talk about the problems and the solutions, but some people need to be working on these things. And again, I am not like leadership position in the LCMS. I'm a pastor. I'm not like in charge of stuff beyond my parish. So maybe there's some things going on. Again, Pastor Harrison and the others who were involved, they helped a lot with the cost of seminary. They get rid of the cost of seminary, which is fantastic. Now you can go to seminary and you don't have to pay tuition. In addition to not having to pay tuition, you have all these churches sponsoring you, which is wonderful. It is an excellent step in the right direction, but it's the first step of many that needs to be taken to solve a lot of these problems. Now, I am not accusing anybody of not taking these steps. My only concern is that while this is wonderful information, this is absolutely a great thing to say, like, look, let's look at these problems. Here are some of the solutions. Let's start thinking about other solutions as well, that there needs to be implementation that follows. So I understand as an organization, the bigger the organization, the harder it is to get the gears to start moving. And we have some people in the LCMS that are actually pushing for a lot of these positive changes. And again, Pastor Harrison is an excellent example, and the team that he's worked with to ensure that people going to seminary don't have to pay for seminary anymore. Huge roadblock to having more pastors was taken down. That's one of the obstacles. There's many other obstacles, and I'm sure they're working on those as well. So my encouragement to you would be to read this book and to share this book with others, have pastors read this book, and even lay people read this book. Because not only will some people who are involved in the process, maybe higher up, get some cool ideas of like, hey, this is how we can address this problem, but also at the layperson level, this might inspire some people to say, look, this is how I can help in my individual church body. How can I contribute to make this parish more successful? How can I help the pastor in his mission? How can I help the mission of the church by spreading the gospel? What if we started, more mission churches and more congregations and church plants and all these other things? Like, you don't have to be a pastor to get something out of this book, and you don't have to be a pastor to implement some of the cool solutions that are in this book as well. Some of the solutions are just one of the solutions is if you're a layperson and you're reading this book and you're convicted and you're like, the harvest is ready and the workers are few. Maybe you're being called to the ministry. Maybe that's something that you need to consider. There's ways into seminary, and you should start talking with people at seminary and say, hey, Set Apart to Serve is an organization that I would highly encourage you to check out. Set Apart to Serve. If you're a layperson and you're reading this book and you're reading other books and you're saying, how can I help? I am a man who is very serious about doctrine. I'm very serious about studying the Word of God. Maybe I don't feel fully qualified to be a pastor, which is a good thing if you feel fully qualified to be a pastor as a layperson. Maybe more self-examination and humility. But Set Apart to Serve, check out this organization, reach out to people at seminary. There might be something you can do. Even if you don't become a pastor yourself, maybe you can learn more about the seminary process, and maybe you know some other people who might become a pastor. Maybe you can become a deacon. Maybe you can become a DCE. You can do all of these things to help support the organization. But reading this book, maybe that'll be an inspiration for you to kind of see, like, where are some problem areas? Where might I have some gifts that might contribute to helping the LCMS and the Christian church in America kind of thrive some more? So overall, my review of this book is fantastic. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was interesting to read. It was easy to read. It was full of great information. It inspired me to start thinking about changes, not that I can make personally, but like, wouldn't it be neat if this was a solution? It inspired me to encourage others to say, hey, look, where are you in the organization? What can you do to kind of address some of these changes? What are your solutions? I want to hear your ideas as well. So this was a great book. I would highly recommend it. Check it out on Amazon. Unfortunately, there's not an audiobook version of it yet. You know how much I love audiobooks. I go through like 3 of them a month. But it is worth the read, and it's not particularly long or difficult. Highly, highly recommend it. Thank you so much for sending me the book and giving me the opportunity to review it. God bless you all, and take care.